Alright, so like I mentioned, this is, well, this over there is Montcalm Park, and this right here is a plaque explaining the fort that once stood here. Now, this plaque calls the fort that was here Fort George, but on the primary source maps that I showed you earlier back at Fort Ontario, they all say that this fort was Fort Oswego. But anyway, much of the information is the same. So, built here is an outlook for Fort Oswego. So, the Fort George that they're talking about would have been down near the port by those large water towers that we saw earlier. But this was Fort Oswego, built here in about October 1755. Lieutenant Colonel Mercer. And then when Montcalm attacked Fort Ontario, like I mentioned, he also attacked this fort and Fort George on August 14th, captured both of them, and then eventually abandoned them as well. Colonel Mercer, it says here, was killed on August 14th when a cannonball was fired and tore through his abdomen or stomach. He was killed and then buried nearby. So that's that. And then I'm going to take a quick little walk through Montcalm Park, because I've never actually been inside. I'm going to take a quick look. Alright, so welcome to historic Montcalm Park. And as you can tell, we are on a hill. Now you can't really tell how big this hill is, but Fort Ontario would be over that way. And in the 18th century, obviously these houses would not be here. Instead, all of the surrounding area would be woods. And on top of this hill, it was primarily a flat plateau, more or less, on which the British eventually established a fort. Fort George. Or, I'm sorry, Fort Oswego. That's one curious thing about the sources. Sometimes, especially the secondary sources, they call this fort Fort Oswego, and then the other fort Fort George, so they get the names right. But then other times, they'll say Fort Oswego, meaning all three forts, or this will be Fort George, and then the other one down by the river will be Fort Oswego. Very confusing. However, when I'm naming them, I'm going by the primary source documents, which is what all historians should, so I don't know why sometimes these forts are given different names, but regardless, I'm going to use the primary sources, and according to them, the fort that was once here was Fort Oswego. Alright, and again, it was a small little fort, primarily just made of timber. In 1755, it was added to by, I believe, Colonel Mercer, and it was given some redoubts to give it some added protection. And then again, captured by the French in 1756. A quaint little park here in the center of the city, named after the general, the French general, no less, that captured the city from the British in 1756, and then promptly abandoned it for unknown reasons. Yeah, so again, these buildings would not be here. This would be on a plateau, and a lot of these trees would not, as far as I know, would not be as crowded. So it would be a lot more it'd be more like a plateau. You'd be able to see the fort from a distance. You most likely, I think, might be able to see the riverside, which is this down there, in 1756. Obviously, modern civilization has taken over. The city of Oswego has built this area up into a development, and as far as I know, I believe this development is more like a, I don't want to say ritzy, but is more wealthy, kind of like Beacon Hill in Boston. It's where the wealthy tend to live. So you get some nicer homes, probably older homes dating back to about the 19th century when Oswego was made into a city. And then as you go that way and even that way, you tend to get more modern architecture and then of course more modern amenities. But yeah. So from here, the British tried to defend, from here, Fort George and Fort Ontario, the British tried to defend Oswego from French General Montcalm in 1756, but unfortunately were not able to because they were outgunned and outnumbered, and they eventually surrendered, and Montcalm was able to take, I believe the sources said 1,300 to 1,700 British soldiers captive, thus ending the British occupation of Oswego in the mid-18th century until about 1759, when when the British took back over from the French and rebuilt it and made it stronger than before, and then used it as bases for their invasions of Canada in the 1760s. Alright, so I'm back in my car. That does it for a little walking tour of Fort Ontario and sort of what I can access of the outlying forts and historical points of the French invasion of 1756. I think we, toured a good portion of what there is to see. We saw Fort Ontario, we saw Fort Oswego, or Montcalm Park, and I detailed more or less kind of where things were and where things happened during the 1756 invasion and how they related to modern day. Alright, so I'm going to leave you here with this good, more or less, view of Montcalm Park, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!